Here's a question that might ruin your morning coffee. What if the reason you're stuck, broke, tired, unfulfilled, watching other people build the life you keep saying you'll build, someday, has nothing to do with your intelligence, your luck, or your circumstances? What if it comes down to something as small, as boring, as unglamorous as what you do in the first 60 minutes after you open your eyes? Most people wake up already losing. They open their eyes, and before their feet even touch the floor, they've already reached for a phone. They've already absorbed someone else's opinion, someone else's crisis, someone else's highlight reel. They have handed the very first moments of their consciousness, the most valuable, least renewable resource they own, to an algorithm designed to keep them anxious and scrolling. And then they wonder why the day runs them over instead of the other way around. There's a reason self-help fails so many people. It's not that the advice is wrong. It's that most of it demands total transformation overnight, new mindset, new discipline, new you, starting now. And when reality doesn't cooperate, people quit by lunchtime. The man you're about to meet nearly died twice. And out of that wreckage, he didn't discover a new mindset. He discovered something far stranger, a structure. A short, repeatable sequence that took his shattered life and rebuilt it, piece by piece, before most people finished their first cup of coffee. By the end of this video, you won't just understand his method. You'll understand why almost everyone who tries to change their life fails at the exact same point, and the one shift that lets a small number of people break through where everyone else stalls out. Introduction. The book is called The Miracle Morning, and the man behind it is Hal Elrod. His promise is almost insultingly simple: the first hour of your day determines the entire trajectory of your life. Not because mornings are magical, but because mornings are the only part of the day you actually control before the world starts making demands on you. This isn't a book that became popular because of clever marketing. It became a movement, translated into dozens of languages, read by entrepreneurs, athletes, single parents, and CEOs, because it did something rare. It gave people who felt powerless a lever they could pull tomorrow morning, with zero money, zero permission, and zero waiting. What you're about to experience isn't a list of habits. It's the story of a man who was told he might never walk again, who lost everything a second time in a way that had nothing to do with his body, and who built, out of pure necessity, a ritual so effective that people now credit it with saving marriages, businesses, and in some documented cases, lives. By the end of this journey, you'll understand exactly why your mornings have been failing you, and exactly what 6-part sequence can flip that switch starting tomorrow. And here's the thing that makes this different from every other productivity video you've watched and forgotten by dinner. This isn't about hustle, it isn't about waking up at 4 a.m. to prove something to strangers on the internet. It's about a specific, repeatable structure that took a man from the floor of a hospital room to the floor of a bankruptcy filing, and out the other side of both, using nothing but the part of the day everyone else sleeps through or scrolls through. Let's begin where he did, at the bottom. Lesson 1: The crash that creates the comeback. Most people wait for permission to change. They wait for the new year, the new job, the right mood, the perfect plan. And so they wait, and life quietly slips by unchanged. Here's the uncomfortable truth: comfort is the enemy of transformation. As long as life is merely fine, there's no fire hot enough to force real change. People don't change because they want to. They change because staying the same becomes unbearable. Hal Elrod didn't choose his turning point. It was chosen for him. In his early 20s, driving home one night, a drunk driver going nearly 70 miles an hour slammed into his car head-on. His heart stopped for several minutes, he broke 11 bones. Doctors told his family he likely wouldn't survive the night, and if he did, he would probably never walk again. He proved them wrong. Slowly, brutally, he relearned how to walk. He went on to build a successful career, get married, become a father, the story critics love, the comeback that makes for a great headline. But here's the part most summaries skip. Years later, life didn't hand him a second triumphant chapter, it handed him a second collapse. The 2008 financial crash gutted his business. He went from earning more than he'd ever imagined to being unable to pay his mortgage, drowning in debt, lying awake at 3 a.m. paralyzed by a fear that felt, in its own way, just as dangerous as that highway had been. And this is the part that makes his story matter to you. Surviving a car crash is dramatic, but learning to survive quiet, grinding, invisible failure, the kind nobody sends flowers for, that's the crash most of us are actually living through. Bills, burnout, a business that isn't working, a version of yourself you don't recognize in the mirror. One morning, at what he later called his lowest point, a friend said something to him almost in passing, that successful people have morning routines. Elrod dismissed it at first. He wasn't a morning person. He'd always been the guy who hit snooze until the last possible second, dragging himself into the day half-conscious and already behind. But desperation makes you try things pride wouldn't allow. So he decided to test an idea. What if he woke up early, not to work harder, but to deliberately build himself into the person capable of surviving what he was facing? Not tips, not tricks, a complete rebuild, done in the only hour of the day nobody else could take from him. Here's what to take from this before we go any further. Stop waiting for your life to force the crash before you make the change. You get to choose your wake-up call. And the cost of choosing it today is infinitely smaller than the cost of waiting for the universe to choose it for you. But deciding to change your mornings is the easy part. The real question is what you actually do with that hour, because most people who try a morning routine quit within a week. Elrod discovered why almost everyone fails, and the answer surprised even him. Lesson 2: The silence before the storm. Think about the last time you felt truly overwhelmed. Racing thoughts, a chest that feels tight before you've even started the day, a to-do list replaying in your head before you've had a sip of water. Most people carry that static with them from the moment they wake up until the moment they collapse into bed. We treat busyness as productivity and stillness as laziness. So we never pause. We go from alarm to phone to shower to commute without a single moment where our mind isn't being fed input from somewhere else. The result is a nervous system that never gets to reset, like a computer that's never rebooted, slowly accumulating glitches until it crashes. Before you do anything else, sit in silence. Not scrolling silence. Actual stillness, a few minutes of deep breathing, meditation, or quiet presence, done deliberately, before the noise of the world gets a vote. It sounds too small to matter. That's exactly why most people skip it. But there's a reason elite performers, monks, and high-stakes decision-makers across completely unrelated fields all independently arrive at the same practice. A calm mind makes better decisions than a reactive one, and the first decision of your day sets the emotional tone for every decision after it. Elrod described those first mornings of silence during his darkest financial period almost like defusing a bomb. His mind wanted to spiral immediately into panic, the mortgage, the debt, the shame. But he forced himself to simply breathe and sit, for just a few minutes, before letting his thoughts loose on the day's problems. And something shifted, not the circumstances, those were still exactly as dire. But the person facing them was steadier, calmer, able to think instead of just react. Tomorrow, before you touch your phone, sit somewhere quiet for even 3 minutes, breathe slowly. Let your mind settle before the world gets to speak first. It won't fix your problems. But it will change who's standing there to face them. Notice what this practice is actually doing. It isn't asking you to solve anything. It's asking you to stop reacting long enough to think clearly. And clarity, it turns out, is the one resource money can't buy back once panic has already spent it for you. Lesson 3: The voice that writes your future. Almost everyone has an inner narrator, and for most people, that narrator is cruel. It says you're not disciplined enough, not smart enough, not far enough along. And here's the trap: we assume that voice is telling us the truth about who we are, when really it's just repeating whatever we've told it the most. Your brain doesn't distinguish well between a statement you've heard 1,000 times and a fact. Repetition builds belief, regardless of whether the thing being repeated is true. Most people spend years unconsciously repeating their doubts, their excuses, their limitations, and then wonder why those things keep proving true. Elrod's answer was affirmations, but not the kind that get mocked in comedy sketches, the empty, I am rich, mantras said with zero belief behind them. He argued that effective affirmations aren't wishful thinking. They're specific, honest statements of who you're committing to become and why, paired with exactly how you intend to get there. The distinction matters enormously. I am a millionaire, said by someone $50,000 in debt, just creates internal friction, a lie the mind rejects. But a statement like, I am becoming the kind of person who manages money with discipline, and today I will track every dollar I spend, is something the mind can actually believe and act on. During his financial collapse, Elrod didn't have evidence yet that things would turn around. What he had was a decision about who he was going to be regardless of the outcome. Each morning, he spoke that decision out loud, not as false confidence, but as a private contract with himself, renewed daily, until the words stopped feeling foreign and started feeling true. Write one sentence tonight, not a vague wish, a specific commitment about who you're choosing to become and the first action that proves it. Say it out loud tomorrow morning before the world offers you a cheaper story about who you are. But even a rewritten inner voice needs somewhere to go. Belief without direction just becomes noise. This is where Elrod's method takes its most cinematic turn, because the next practice isn't about words at all. It's about pictures. Lesson 4, Seeing the life before you live it. Ask most people what they want their life to look like in 5 years, and you'll get a vague shrug: happier, more successful, less stressed. Vague goals produce vague results, because the brain can't move toward a target it can't clearly see. Uncertainty is exhausting. When you don't have a vivid picture of where you're going, every obstacle feels like a reason to quit, because you're not sure the destination was worth the fight in the first place. Elrod's next practice was visualization, spending a few focused minutes each morning mentally rehearsing the specific outcomes he wanted and, just as importantly, rehearsing himself taking the actions required to get there. This isn't daydreaming. Athletes have used this exact technique for decades, mentally running through a perfect performance before ever setting foot on the field, because the brain doesn't fully distinguish between a vividly imagined action and a physically practiced one. Elrod pictured, in detail, rebuilding his business. Not a fantasy where money simply appeared, but a specific mental rehearsal, the calls he needed to make, the difficult conversations he needed to have, the version of himself calm and capable enough to have them. Each morning, before doing any of it in reality, he did it first in his mind. By the time the real moment arrived, some of the fear had already been spent in rehearsal. Close your eyes tomorrow for 2 minutes and picture, in specific detail, not just the outcome you want but yourself taking the exact action required today to move toward it. Rehearse the courage before you need it. Silence had calmed him. Affirmations had redirected his identity. Visualization had shown him the destination. But none of it means anything if the body carrying that mind can't keep up. Your body each morning might be shaping your mindset more than your mindset is shaping your body. Lesson 5, The body leads where the mind follows. Most people treat exercise as an optional extra, something for people with more time, more energy, more motivation than they currently have. So they skip it, especially in the morning, especially when life is already hard. There's a backwards assumption baked into how most people think about energy, that you need to feel energetic first before you move. In reality, it works the other way around. Motion creates energy. Stillness creates more stillness. Elrod wasn't advocating for an hour-long gym session before sunrise. His version was strikingly modest, even a few minutes of movement, jumping jacks, stretching, a short walk, anything that gets blood moving and signals to the body that the day has begun. The goal wasn't fitness. It was chemistry, using movement to shift mood, focus, and confidence before a single real-world problem had to be faced. In his lowest financial weeks, exercise was the last thing Elrod felt like doing. His instinct was to stay curled up, avoid the day, avoid the mirror. But he forced a few minutes of movement anyway, and noticed something he hadn't expected. His anxiety, which had felt like an immovable weight the moment he woke up, became slightly more manageable after just a few minutes of moving his body. Not gone, manageable, and manageable was enough to take the next step. Tomorrow, before checking a single message, move your body for 5 minutes. Not for your waistline, for your mind. Prove to yourself, physically, that you're capable of taking action before you feel ready. At this point, 4 practices had rebuilt his mind and his body. But there was still a gap, the space between who he currently was and who he needed to become to solve problems he'd never faced before. That gap, he realized, could only be closed by borrowing wisdom he didn't yet have. Lesson 6: Borrowing a mind smarter than your own. Most people facing a crisis try to solve it using only the knowledge they already have, which is exactly the knowledge that got them into the crisis in the first place. We rarely admit that the version of us stuck in a problem is often the least equipped version of us to solve it. Growth requires input from outside your current thinking, yet most people stop learning the moment they leave school, treating knowledge as something you finish rather than something you feed daily. Elrod's next habit was reading, just a handful of pages each morning from a book chosen specifically to develop the skill or mindset he needed most. The logic is almost mathematically simple. A few pages a day compounds into dozens of books a year, each one depositing ideas, frameworks, and hard-won lessons from people who had already solved problems similar to his. During his rebuilding, Elrod deliberately chose books written by people who had faced financial ruin and rebuilt something greater. He wasn't reading for entertainment. He was reading like a man borrowing a stranger's hard-earned map through territory he'd never crossed before. A few pages each morning, absorbed slowly, began reshaping how he thought about money, risk, and resilience, not overnight, but page by page, week by week. Choose one book right now, not for later, for tomorrow morning, that speaks directly to the exact problem you're facing. Read 10 pages before you check a single notification. Let someone who already solved your problem whisper the answer to you, 1 page at a time. 5 practices down, silence had steadied him, words had redirected him, vision had aimed him, movement had energized him, reading had educated him. But there was one piece left, and without it, Elrod discovered, all the other progress had a dangerous habit of quietly disappearing. Lesson 7: The proof you forget you have. Here's something almost nobody talks about: progress is invisible in the moment. You can be transforming significantly over months and still feel, day to day, like nothing is changing, because change is slow enough that memory alone can't capture it. The human brain is wired to notice threats and problems far more vividly than it notices quiet wins. Left unchecked, this creates a distorted internal record where struggles are remembered in vivid detail and progress is barely remembered at all, which is exactly why motivation quietly erodes even when things are actually improving. Elrod's final practice was writing, a few minutes each morning recording insights, gratitude, or progress. Not a diary of feelings for their own sake, but a deliberate act of capturing evidence. Evidence that the plan was working. Evidence of lessons learned. Evidence, on the hardest days, that he had survived hard days before. Months into his financial rebuilding, Elrod could look back through pages of his own handwriting and see something his memory alone would have erased: a slow, steady climb out of the hole he'd been in. On days when panic whispered that nothing was working, the pages proved otherwise. He wasn't relying on how he felt that morning. He was relying on the written record of every morning before it. Tonight or tomorrow, write 3 sentences: 1 thing you're grateful for, 1 lesson you learned recently, and 1 small win you almost forgot about. Build your own proof file, because you will need it on the day your memory tries to lie to you. The full picture: why the sequence matters more than any single habit. Here's the part most people miss when they try to copy just one of these practices and wonder why it doesn't transform their life the way it transformed his. None of these 6 practices, silence, affirmations, visualization, exercise, reading, writing, is individually revolutionary. People have known about meditation, journaling, and reading for centuries. What made Elrod's approach different wasn't the ingredients. It was the sequence, and the discipline of doing all 6, briefly, every single morning, before the world could interrupt. Silence calms the mind. A calm mind can hear a new identity spoken through affirmations. A new identity gives visualization something real to picture. A clear picture makes movement feel purposeful instead of empty. An energized body absorbs reading more effectively. And reading gives you something worth writing down. Each piece sharpens the next. Skip one, and the chain weakens. Do all 6, even briefly, even imperfectly, and something compounds that no single habit could produce alone. This is the real breakthrough hiding underneath the surface-level advice. Small, consistent action compounds far more powerfully than occasional, dramatic effort. Elrod didn't rebuild his finances in one heroic morning. He rebuilt them in hundreds of quiet, unremarkable mornings that, stacked together, became unrecognizable from where he started. Let's conclude it. Let's be honest about what just happened here. You didn't just learn 6 habits. You watched a man get hit by a truck, told he'd never walk again, walk anyway, and then get hit by an entirely different kind of truck years later, one made of debt and fear and 3 a.m. panic, and build his way out of that too, using nothing but the hour before most people even open their eyes. The transformation isn't really about mornings. It's about proving to yourself, in the very first hour of the day, that you are someone who follows through, before anyone else is even awake to see it, and long before the day has a chance to talk you out of it. Here's your challenge, and I want you to actually do this, not just nod along and close the tab. Tomorrow morning, before you check your phone, pick just one of these 6 practices, even 60 seconds of silence, one honest affirmation spoken out loud, or 5 minutes of movement, and do it before the world gets a vote in how your day begins. Don't wait for a crash to force your hand. Don't wait for the version of this story where you're the one lying awake at 3 a.m. wondering how everything fell apart. You get to choose your wake-up call, starting tomorrow, for free, with nothing but a decision. If this story moved you, you know exactly what to do. Hit subscribe, because we're about to go deeper into the minds and methods of the people who refuse to stay broken, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Here's the idea I want you to carry with you long after this video ends. The life you're waiting to have is being built or destroyed in the 60 minutes you're currently giving away for free. Every single morning, you're either investing that hour into the person you want to become, or spending it on the person you're trying to leave behind. Which one will tomorrow morning be?